recording this webinar, and we'll upload to the Pritchard Committee website just as soon as we can. Before I turn the webinar over to Sue for her presentation, I'd like to share a few examples of how Kentucky communities are beginning to address chronic absence. But first, before I delve into the today story, I really want to acknowledge that Kentucky does have a long history of supporting students who need an extra hand to make it to school each day ready to learn. The Family Resource and Youth Service Centers, which we belovedly call Friskies, have made a big difference in this across the state. Today, we're so pleased Kentucky has sent a cross-agency team to a national conference called Every Student, Every Day. And since that time, they've been meeting regularly to really figure out what strategies are needed in Kentucky to make sure that we address this issue. Christina Weeder from the Kentucky Department of Education and Melissa Goins from the Cabinet for Health and Family Services are really good contacts of people who've been working at the state level on this group. In Louisville, JCPS has also started working on chronic absenteeism. Last year, they started measuring the data and incorporated it into their data dashboard system. And they are about to begin working in 7 elementary schools, actually in partnership with Sue. So we're very delighted Sue is joining us via her home, but is traveling to Kentucky quite a bit these days. And next, the Northern Kentucky Education Council has an attendance action team that is working on chronic absence, and they are focusing in with 9 partner elementary schools and really getting the whole community together to address this issue. And one thing I really love about what they're doing, they measure their data constantly, and they have really seen some progress. The average chronic absentee rate across their partner schools was above 7% last year, and I'm sorry, 7% in 2014-15, and was 5% for 2015-16. So it's great to see that progress. And I will go ahead and tee up that Sue will be sharing some preliminary statewide data on chronic absence across Kentucky at the state level. So that's very exciting. So with that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Sue.
Hi, thank you so much, Cory, and I'm so pleased to be with you all this evening. So I'm going to walk through some important information. I want to ensure that we're all collectively really clear on what we mean when we say chronic absence. I want to share with you some evolutions that are happening at the federal level around this issue of chronic absence, share with you your Kentucky data, as Cory just shared, and then also talk about what we understand really makes a difference in turning chronic absence around. And then I finally want to share with you how we're thinking about the Every Student Succeeds Act opportunity as it relates to chronic absence. And then I really look forward to hearing from all of you in regard to any questions that you have for me about this important issue. Next slide, Cory. And so attendance works, just to be clear, and Cory talked about a little bit about our organization. We're a national organization that works at the state, local, district level, and in individual schools. And we really pride our effort to connect at a very local level around the work. And in many ways, our partnerships with schools and school districts across the country, including in Kentucky, has helped to better inform our strategies and what we share broadly with other partners about what works and what really makes a difference. And very recently, prior to joining in partnership with Jefferson County Public Schools, we were also working in partnership with Berea College in a few communities in Appalachia, working in Wesley County and Perry County, supporting some strategies at the high school level. So we are really appreciative of all the attention that Kentucky's been paying to this issue, and just the incredible partnerships all across the state that have really sought to better understand this issue, and then really have sought to implement evidence and research-based strategies and informing our work, and also just being really great partners. Next slide, please. So one of the things that has just happened recently is, you can see there's a map on your screen, and this is a map of the first ever national data release of chronic absence in the country. And so the Office of Civil Rights, through their Civil Rights Data Collection tool, decided in the most recent round of data to collect information on the number of children that missed school for any reason, who missed 15 or more days. And what we found as a result of that data collection is that chronic absenteeism is a underreported epidemic level issue across our country, with more than 500 school districts reporting rates of 30% or more of their kids chronically absent, and almost every district in our country experiencing some level of chronic absence. And so what we really see this as is a call to action and an opportunity to further educate folks about this issue of chronic absence, and then really to talk about what it takes to turn it around. Next slide, please. And so what we know about chronic absence, you can keep going, Cory, is first we want to talk about what it actually is. And so chronic absence is missing school for any reason. And what we're really focused on here is lost instructional time. So if a student is missing school for excused reasons, or excused such as perhaps an unmanaged chronic health issue like asthma, or if you have unexcused absences. I know here in Baltimore, where I'm from, sometimes we have older siblings that stay home with their younger siblings to take care of them while their mom and dad go to work, and that is an unexcused absence, but it's a student who's missing school and missing instructional time. And then finally, when students are missing school due to suspension. So when you roll these up into chronic absence, the other key point to understand is that some absences are unavoidable, and they happen. Kids get sick, family emergencies happen, and so we're not saying that that absences don't happen or shouldn't happen, because there are good reasons for that. But when they happen at a rate of frequency of 10% or more of a child's days in school, then that's a level of absenteeism that we call chronic absence, because we know based on research that at that level of absence, a student gets off track to academic success. And so the very easy way to translate that is 2 days or more a month. So the other important thing to think about when we use a 10% measure is that it allows us to intervene at any time in the year. So rather than waiting until the end of the year, where a student has perhaps missed 15, 18, 20 or more days of school, and then flagging it and noticing that a child was chronically absent for an entire year, the reason we use that 10% measure is because it allows us to notice if a student is tracking or heading towards chronic absence as early as September or October. And it allows us to intervene early, find out what's happening, and put a kid back on track to academic success and help to address whatever the issue is. So any lost instructional time that rolls up to 10% or more of their days on roll. So the next thing I just wanted to talk about is the difference between chronic absence and other measures of attendance that you may be familiar with. And so to be clear, we actually think that all of these different measures, whether it's average daily attendance or truancy or chronic absence, collectively tell a really important story about what's happening with the school. But it's also important to understand what each measure is telling you about the students in the school and be able to distinguish between them. And so average daily attendance, which has been a pretty popular measure of accountability or even suggesting that a school is doing well with attendance, tells you on average the number of children that showed up any given day. And so it's a helpful indicator in that if you're looking at weekly attendance and you're looking at your averages, you might notice, for example, that the average dips dramatically on a Friday or it dips dramatically on a Monday. And that's an actionable data point. You can say, okay, so now that we know attendance goes down on Mondays on average, that we're going to have a pizza party, or we're going to do field trips, or we're going to do some kind of special assembly. And so you can use that data to make decisions about an intervention that's a global intervention based on that average data. But what it doesn't tell you, and much like if you had, say, the average reading scores for a group of third graders, what you wouldn't know from that is which third graders are struggling with their reading and need additional intervention and support. And you also wouldn't know which third graders are really excelling at the reading and maybe need more challenging work or some other opportunities. And so an average gives you an indicator that is useful, but it doesn't tell you which kids need additional support. Also, truancy in Kentucky is 6 unexcused absences, and that's a very important measure to pay attention to, but we're only looking at unexcused. And oftentimes our younger children, as you'll see later, in pre-K, K, and first grade, second grade, third grade, generally aren't truant. They oftentimes, if they're missing school, some adult knows, and they usually, their absences come with some kind of note from home. And so when we're focusing on truancy, we're only focusing on unexcused absences, and we're also potentially missing children who are absent in the early grades. And then finally, chronic absence, as I mentioned before, is 10% of your days on roll. When you're thinking about intervention during the school year, and with the OCR data release, they actually used a day measure, which was 15 days. Next slide. So this goes back to explain the difference between average daily attendance and chronic absence. And so what you're looking at here is a group of schools, 6 of them in Oakland, California, and 6 in New York. And you'll notice that even though the schools all had an average daily attendance rate, the ones on the left are all average daily attendance rates of 95%. And then the ones on the right, the New York schools, were all average daily attendance rates of 90%. And so oftentimes when people hear that percent, right, 90, 91, 92, generally it gives you a warm feeling that you're being successful. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where having an average in the 90s doesn't actually equate to positive outcomes for all of your kids. And so you can see that even the schools in Oakland with a 95% average daily attendance rate actually had pretty significant populations of kids who were chronically absent. And the way that that works is if you can imagine a school with 200 kids, if 10 kids are absent in a single day, that school would have a 95% average daily attendance rate for the day that those 10 children miss. The question is, when you start looking from day to day, is it the same 10 kids that are missing each day, or do you have a lot of kids who are missing a few days over a whole year, or do you have a subpopulation of kids that are chronically absent? And so the important thing to understand is ADA does not tell you which kids are those 10 kids. And so you actually have to look at your chronic absence data to figure out whether or not you have kids who are missing enough school to be off track academically. Next slide. And so this slide really tells the difference between truancy and chronic absence. And this is from Baltimore City, where I'm from. And what you'll see here is that bottom line, the lighter gray line, are the kids who were flagged as truant in Baltimore City. And then the darker blue line are the kids who are chronically absent. And you can see by looking at this data that if we in Baltimore City only paid attention to the children who were truant for intervention, we would miss thousands of kids in every grade level who were actually missing enough school to be behind academically. And so by using the chronic absence measure, it helps to ensure that we are noticing all of the children who are actually missing enough school to be flagged as off track to academic success. Next slide. And the other thing that's really important to understand about chronic absence is that it's sporadic. Oftentimes, children don't generally miss 18 or more days in one go. So they'll miss a couple of days here, they miss a couple of days there. And this is important because oftentimes our systems have been set up across the country, and I've seen this repeatedly, where you can pull the consecutive absence report, the 3-day consecutive absence report, the 5-day consecutive absence report, and we've spent a lot of time ensuring that our systems flag kids that are missing several days in a row. And that's important for a variety of reasons, because we want to make sure that if the kid is missing 3, 4, or 5 days in a row, we want to make sure that our school staff are making phone calls home, finding out what's going on. There could be a communicable disease that kid could be in trouble, or their family is like a family emergency situation and may need support. And so we don't want to move away from having those kinds of flags in our system. But what we do need to do is add to our systems the ability to flag kids who are missing a day here and there and then are tracking towards chronic absence, which may not get noticed without the right kind of system. And so, and the other thing that happens, so there's a variety of things that happen with sporadic absenteeism, but I'll just share a few. One of the things we know from talking to families is that if you talk to a mom or dad and you said, do you think your child missed a lot of instructional time if they've missed 3 or 4 days in a row? And parents almost universally will respond, yes, absolutely, my child missed a lot of school. We're going to have to contact the teacher. We're going to need makeup work. We're going to have to get them back on track. If you ask those same parents, well, what if your child missed 2 days in September and then 2 days in October? Does your child have a lot of instructional time to make up? And parents often respond that they don't think so. And I believe in part, and from talking with families, when absences are sporadic, families are under the assumption then that it's easier for their child to stay on track and catch up because they're not missing instructions several days in a row. But ultimately, from the research, which you'll see in just a moment, we have found that, in fact, kids do fall behind and that it is problematic. The other thing that happens is that when we don't notice a few absences here and a few absences there, we actually get licensed for more absences. When we don't make those phone calls, when we don't send a letter, when we don't express concern, what ends up happening, especially older youth, might then assume that it's okay for them to miss even more days. And we've seen a lot of evidence of older youth assuming that because nobody called home or nobody pulled them to the side in the school to say what's going on, then they end up actually missing several days in a row and they become increasingly absent, and it becomes a bigger issue over time. Next slide. So one of the things that I am so thankful for is the Kentucky State Department of Ed, who's such an incredible partner in this work and is really working hard to figure this out for Kentucky, shared the data with attendance work so that I could produce these charts for you. And what I asked them to do was share with me grade level data on the percent and number of children who were chronically absent, kindergarten through 12th grade. And we used the parameters of any child who was on the roll for at least 90 days, who then missed 10% of their days of school. And what you can see here is across the board a fairly high rate of chronic absence from kindergarten all the way through elementary school. In every grade, at least 1 out of 10 children are chronically absent, and kindergarten is actually a little bit higher. And then when you get to high school, we're talking about almost 1 out of 5 kids. And we're about to move into the what happens now, and you're going to see that it's hugely impactful that this number of kids are at risk based on their attendance. And if you go to the next slide, Cory, you can see that we don't have just the percentages, we also have the number of kids. And so it's, thousands, tens of thousands of kids by grade level across the state that are at risk based on their attendance. And if you go to the next slide, we're going to get into the academic impact. So what we know, and this data that you're looking at is a group of second graders in Chicago who were chronically, who had various rates of attendance. And on the left axis, you have their reading scores, their DIBEL scores for second grade. And along the bottom, you have their rate of attendance. And you can see the stair-step pattern down for each additional year of chronic absence. There was another greater impact to their reading outcomes in second grade. And so the students all the way to the left that were never chronically absent, pre-K to second grade, had the highest rates of reading outcome. And even a little bit of chronic absence in pre-K, as you can see, had some academic impact. And then as the students went on and missed more days of school over a period of time, the level of intervention that was necessary by second grade increased dramatically. And so the other thing to notice is, in addition to the correlation between absence and reading outcomes, is the idea that there were a group of children, 306 in this particular cohort, that were chronically absent every year, pre-K, K, first, and second. So they missed at least 18 days a year every year for 4 years. And I think that speaks to this issue of, do we have the right systems set up to track the children who are missing too much school, and to put in place the appropriate interventions. And this analysis was done before Chicago took pretty significant steps to begin to monitor and track this data. So I would hope that if we repeated this analysis, we would find that there were far fewer children that had this repeated level of chronic absence. Next slide. The other thing that's important to know is what happens to our older youth when they miss this much school. And I will share with you that there was research out of Johns Hopkins University that found that 8th grade attendance rates or chronic absence rates were a greater predictor of whether or not a child made it to graduation than test score data, behavioral data, and any other data point that they could look at, which were all important data points and that had some predictive value about whether or not a child was going to make it to graduation. But the indicator that had the greatest level of predictive value was chronic absence. And so what you're looking at here are a group of children in Utah and their rate of absence as it relates to their graduation. And you can see that when the children that had 0 years of chronic absence, 8th through 12th grade, the majority of them, 90% of them, made it to graduation. And then with just 1 year of chronic absence, you can see a significant impact to the number of children who made it to graduation. And then when you look at 2, 3, and 4 years of chronic absence, now we're in the less than half of our kids making it to graduation. So one thing that we know from both work here, because I live here, is the relationship between attendance in high school, course completion, and then graduation. And what we've found is that, in particular in 9th grade, if a child is chronically absent, they end up failing multiple courses depending on their rate of attendance. And the more, the lower the rate of attendance, the more courses that they end up failing in their freshman year. And what we have then are a group of students that get stuck in their freshman year and then continue to struggle with their attendance, continue to struggle with their academics, and ultimately don't make it to high school. And I often think about the fact that, I'm sure if we did the analysis, we would see that a number of these freshmen actually had a history of low levels of attendance prior to getting to high school. And then when you arrive at high school, the academic, the level of challenge increases. Kids are in a different place. They're less well known by the administrators. And so the layers of barriers that keep a kid from attending school regularly increase because students are in a place where they're not known, and they may be struggling academically already, and they may already have a history of chronic absence that the school may not be aware of. So it's a huge predictor in graduation and school completion. Next slide, please. So we know at Attendance Works and through the research that improving attendance matters, because for our youngest children, especially for children who come from communities that are dealing with high levels of poverty, that school is the place where they are exposed to literacy-rich environments and exposed to numeracy and begin to build their reading skills. And if they miss those important foundational years, that it becomes much harder for those young people to then catch up as the years progress. And so having them engaged and in school from pre-K and K on is incredibly important to their success as students. We also know that time on task makes a difference. When students attend school regularly, they're on track to success. We also know that attendance is a college and career skill. You have to show up to college to be successful. You have to show up for your job to be successful. And when schools are creating an environment that engages their students and families, we find that generally they have lower rates of chronic absence. So chronic absence, in addition to being an indicator of academic success, can also prove to be an indicator of school climate and student and parent engagement. It also can demonstrate if the rates of chronic absence are low, that a school has really figured out from a practice perspective what it takes to follow up and intervene when their kids are missing too much school. And so part of the work that we do at Attendance Works is we look for bright spot schools that have low rates of chronic absence, and then seek to understand what those principals and school communities are doing or systems are doing to really support having that low rate of chronic absence. And we always find excellent practice with some commonalities and some really interesting, creative, unique actions that these principals and staff put in place. Next slide. So what we've learned from the bright spots analysis is that attendance is higher when schools promote a sense of belonging, when they ensure that their instructional practice is in an engaging, exciting environment for children to be part of, where schools engage in restorative practices or other types of disciplinary models that really are about understanding the behavior behind the misbehavior and understanding what might be the underlying causes of those misbehaviors. So creating an environment where we're not necessarily as focused on punishment as much as we're focused on understanding and restoring and helping children to learn new ways of behavior. Where we're also meeting the needs of families that are struggling. So we find schools that have done some really interesting work, such as having school uniform closets, breakfast programs, washers and dryers so that families can wash their child's school clothes so that they have clean, fresh clothes every day. One particular principal had a partnership with a local barber shop and a salon so that the kids could have their hair done. So there are a lot of innovative practices, but the point that principals who are doing this work have made is really seeking to understand for their community what the barriers are and then putting in place effective strategies to overcome those barriers. And the other thing that those schools do is absolutely very intentionally reach out to and engage families and help them to understand how easily absences can add up and help families to track absences at home. What we know is that, I mean, we all lead really busy lives. And if you ask me in December how many days my kid has missed since the beginning of the school year, if I don't have an easy method for keeping track of that, or if I'm not getting reports home from school, if it's not on the report card, or if it's not in PowerSchool or other online tools, I probably can't give you a very good answer. So in part, these schools are really making it very easy for parents to know their child's attendance and to help to flag for parents when the attendance is heading in a direction that's worrisome. Next slide. We also know when we think about attendance and improvement, and we think about who makes a difference, it's the whole school community. The children make a difference when they're excited to be in school and they feel connected and engaged, when they're receiving incentives and recognition and acknowledgement for their daily attendance, when families understand that early attendance matters and also understand if they are having a challenge, that they have the kinds of relationships at the school that they can go to someone and ask for help. When our staff create a positive and warm environment, when our staff communicates effectively with families about the importance of daily attendance, and when our staff help to support routine building, creating a culture where people feel connected and engaged, and then the community can play a role in helping to support good and improved attendance as well, by partnering with schools and school districts in regard to resources or volunteers that can serve as success mentors, when they can help to bring in strategies like tutors, after-school programs, before care. There's a whole incredible list of things that communities have done all across the country to help to support their schools and having good and improved attendance that you can access on our website. Next slide. So one of the things that we really want to be clear about is when we talk about making a difference in decreasing the rate of chronic absence in schools, that we understand what data we need to use to know which kids. And so just a quick check-in, identify which kids are off track based on their attendance. And in particular, if you have a student that's missed 2 to 3 days of school in September, in between August and the end of the month of September, so in the first 6 to 8 weeks of school, and they were chronically absent in the prior school year, that's a huge red flag. And that would be a family we would want to connect with and better understand what's happening. Next slide. The other thing that we have to do is understand the cause of chronic absence for our school, our subgroups of students, and individual students. And so when we look at chronic absence, it's a big problem. Some districts are experiencing 30 or 40% of their kids are chronically absent, and that can feel extraordinarily overwhelming. And when we have a large problem, part of the solution, or part of figuring out the solution to solving our big problem, is to break it down into smaller, solvable problems. And how we do that is by understanding what are the underlying barriers that our families are experiencing in getting to school every day. And so when I think about this work in chronic absence, and we have 4 big buckets, I think about it as a puzzle. It's a puzzle we have to solve. And every school and every community has this puzzle. And the specific puzzles, I mean, for our particular chronic absence problem might be different in my son's school versus, your child's school or your neighborhood school. And so one of the buckets could be the lack of understanding of the importance of attendance in the early grades and how that really lays the foundation for your child's success later on. And so that's a part of the puzzle can be done some analysis of practice counts to learn that there's not an understanding of the importance of early grades attendance. So now we know that one of the things we have to do is do that education and raise that awareness. Or maybe it's the sporadic versus consecutive, and we need to do education and raise awareness around that. The other kinds of barriers and challenges that families experience are actually significant barriers, such as lack of access to health or dental care, poor transportation, trauma and mental health in the community, safe passages to school, family conflict or instability. And those are pretty significant barriers, depending on the level of challenge the community is experiencing in this particular bucket. It may require a school or a school district to partner with other community agencies, nonprofits, and public agencies to begin to address barriers like these. If it's a couple of families, the school may be able to partner with the district, but if it's a larger number of the families, then the school needs to figure out who their public partners to help address those barriers. The last 2 buckets, diversion and disengagement. There are issues within a school building that lead to either aversion or disengagement. So, for example, if there's a bully in a classroom, it might lead to disengagement for some kids, and it might lead to aversion for other kids. And so we have these examples that they sort of cross-cutting, but if a child's struggling academically or socially, if there's issues in discipline, if male parents have negative experiences, if there's challenges around if there are challenges of relationships with the adults in the building, all of these can lend themselves to aversion and disengagement. And so it's important to unpack this data using surveys and focus groups and conversations with families and students to better understand what are the particular challenges for your school community. Next slide. The other approach that we take at Attendance Works is to ensure that we're taking a prevention and intervention approach to reducing chronic absence. And so this is the public health model. You've seen it. If you're involved with response to intervention, if you're involved with multi-tiered systems of support, if you're in the public health field, you'll have seen, or PBIS, you'll have seen a pyramid much like this. And attendance and chronic absence fits perfectly within this model. And the idea is that we want to put in place strategies that prevent chronic absence from happening in the first place. And we have 5 site-based strategies that you'll see in just a moment, where in our experience in working with schools, when schools are operating and implementing in all 5 areas, they generally have lower rates of chronic absence. But even with our best efforts and around prevention, education, awareness, a positive school climate and culture, some of our families and students are still going to experience some challenges related to getting to school every day. And that's where we have our Tier 2 intervention focus, which is really at that point about understanding what the specific barriers are for the students who are missing too much school. And what ultimately you can do with your Tier 2 interventions, some of the work is going to be about helping to solve individual problems that are unique to a particular student or family. Some of the work ends up being about finding commonalities between a group of kids that then becomes a prevention strategy. And so the idea of a uniform closet is a prevention strategy that was created as a result of identifying a common barrier where families didn't have enough uniforms to last through the week and didn't have enough resources to buy, 3, 4, 5 pairs of uniforms. And so when school staff learned that this was a common barrier, creating the closet and helping families to get additional vouchers and resources to buy more uniforms became a prevention strategy rather than helping every individual family that was struggling with that particular barrier. One of the situations we identified, there were a group of kids that were missing school, and when we did the school-based analysis, and there were it was a group of 4th graders, and there were 3 4th grade classes. When we dug into the data even more, we found that the majority of the chronically absent 4th graders were coming from one classroom. And when we checked in to really figure out, well, what's going on in this particular classroom, we learned that that was a classroom that had a leak in it that hadn't been fixed, and there was mold in the ceiling. And so it was actually triggering asthma and other kinds of responses to the mold and causing chronic absence because the kids were sick. And so it becomes really important to start to unpack those stories connected to the data to understand what's happening so you can actually solve the problems meaningfully. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned, there's the 5 site-based strategies. And so when principals and their school teams implement across these 5 strategies, we find generally lower rates of chronic absence. And so one of the things that we really encourage schools to do is to recognize good and improved attendance and not just perfect attendance. And absolutely, we should celebrate those kids that come every day. But we also want to celebrate the kids who come most days. And we want to acknowledge that they're there and they're missing 5 or fewer days or 9 or fewer days, and we want to make sure that they know that that matters. And then if we have a young person who's been struggling with their attendance and then they get better, we absolutely want to recognize and notice that as well. And also for younger kids, notice their parents. Phone call home saying, Susie was in school every day this week, and we just want to acknowledge that and thank you for getting her here. So that's a common good practice. Engaging students and parents in the life of the school. It's about the climate, the culture, the clubs, the after-school activities, the parent committees, but it's also about just being really clear about attendance and chronic absence. Monitoring attendance data in practice. Schools that have better attendance have a team that is focused on this issue. They're looking at their trend data, they're understanding which grades are most vulnerable, and they also know which kids are most vulnerable. And they're looking at that data depending on the rate of absence, weekly, biweekly, or monthly. Generally, we encourage schools to look at it at least biweekly so that not too many absences add up. Then providing personalized early outreach. We have far too many schools in our country that depend on the robocall to be the source of communication around attendance. And while that's useful and important, especially when you have a district that has a lot of kids that are missing too much school, for 1 day of absence, a robocall might be good enough, but when we have kids who are trending towards chronic absence and missing many days, then we want to make sure that we're taking the next step and reaching out to those families personally to connect with them and to begin to unpack and understand what's going on and to express concern. And so it's really important that be personalized. If we're making calls and we're not getting through, then we need to call at a different time. Sometimes that means showing up at the house. It really is an extra level of effort, but given the data that you've seen earlier, you can understand why it's so important to put that extra level of effort in place. And then finally, the programmatic responses to barriers, which we've already discussed. Next slide. So I'm going to just highlight for you very quickly, Arkansas Campaign for Grade Level Reading is an incredible partner. I've been working in Arkansas for 3 years now around chronic absence. You can go to the next slide. And what's so exciting about their work, and I just want you to know that you have a link to a video that, that highlights this really incredible school that's turned around chronic absence, decreased it by double digits based on some excellent community engagement and parent partnerships. But what I want to share with you is the Campaign for Grade Level Reading in Arkansas is working across these different system strategies to help to turn around chronic absence in the schools that are part of their campaign called Make Every Day Count. And so for positive engagement, the Arkansas Campaign for Grade Level Reading actually developed a whole set of materials, banners, buttons, bookmarks, flyers, pledges, you name it, all available for free to download for schools, and also have helped some of their schools with printing costs so that they can just get the message out there and make sure it was effective messaging. The other thing that the campaign did was partner with their State Department of Education to help to ensure that individual schools could pull data reports for their buildings to be able to identify which kids and which grades were most, and which subpopulations were most affected by chronic absence. They've engaged their cooperative, their co-op, their regional learning labs, in partnership with them, have started to train school system staff and school day staff around this issue of chronic absence. And then on the shared accountability piece, they're now focusing on ESSA and trying to understand what the opportunities are for helping to increase accountability for attendance, given what we understand about the relationship to academic outcomes for kids. So a really exciting campaign. If you go to the next slide, you'll see their banner at the bottom. That's the banner that they actually gave to every school that was part of the campaign. And there's a little bright spot on Monitor Elementary, and the link takes you to Monitor. And I'll just say briefly, one of the things that they focused on at Monitor, they have a really interesting student population with a group of Marshallese children, a group of Hispanic and Latino children, and then they have a group of Caucasian children. That's the majority of their population. And their principal actually traveled to the Marshallese Islands to better understand the culture of this community that she was serving, so that she could connect with them more deeply and help to engage them in the life of the school, building on what she learned about their culture and what they value. And she talks about that in the video. And I know it's a sort of a really outstanding example, but it's the kind of relationship building that principals who are successful do with their communities. You don't have to necessarily travel to their homeland. You can build those relationships locally, but she's just so neat. So I really encourage you to watch the video and learn more about what they did there. Next slide. And so I just want to touch base really quickly on Attendance Awareness Month. Next slide. We have some great work happening. September Awareness Month is the month of September. And that's because we know, and you can see from this slide, that when children miss school in the month of September, we know they're more likely to be chronically absent by the end of the year. Next slide. I'm just flip through these, Cory, and I'm just going to talk about them really quick. We have our Count Us In Toolkit. You can go to the toolkit and get a lot of great ideas about what you can do. We have our superintendent's call to action. We already have 32 superintendents from Kentucky that have signed on. Next slide. We have a map. I think the map is coming next. Yes. Where you can post what you're doing to celebrate Attendance Awareness Month, and you can also go to the map to get some cool ideas about things you can do in your community. Next slide. And then, oh yes, we have a webinar coming up on September 8th. We're actually releasing a national report on chronic absence. We use the OCR data to do some analysis, and we've learned some really interesting facts about chronic absence in our country that I can't share with you because it's all embargoed until September the 6th. You can go to our website and learn more, and definitely join us on September 8th to learn more about what we found. And then we're going to also highlight some bright spots. Next slide. And then the last thing I just want to share with you is on the Every Student Succeeds. We have some tools on our website. So the last thing I want to share with you is the Every Student Succeeds Act. It does two things around chronic absence that I want to make sure you know about. One thing that you can just flip to this, Cory. One of the things that Every Student Succeeds Act requires is that all states report chronic absence. And so starting in the 16-17 school year, states will be required to report by school level the rate of chronic absence and then the rate of chronic absence by student subpopulation. And so we will have publicly available data for chronic absence across the country starting this coming school year. The other thing that the Every Student Succeed Act does is creates the opportunity for states across the country to create their own rubric for accountability. And there are 3 measures that are very specific academic measures. And then there's a 4th measure called a measure of school quality and student success. And if you go to the next slide, it asks states to identify indicators that are linked to academic outcomes that meet these criteria, that the indicators are valid, reliable, that you can calculate them the same across schools and school districts, that you can disaggregate the data, and that it's a proven indicator, that it's a research-based indicator. And what we're finding is chronic absence is one of the few indicators that actually checks all the boxes for ESSA. And we're, as an organization, really encouraging states to think about chronic absence in conjunction with other indicators. We actually think it's more useful if you also have climate or other types of data in the mix to tell a really robust story about school quality and student success, leveraging chronic absence and other types of data for schools to be able to use in their needs assessment and their school improvement process. And we actually have a brief on this issue that Cory is going to send out and share with you all so that you can see our thinking behind why we think this is an important indicator and the case that we're making, at least as an organization, about why states should consider it. And I think that's it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sue. That was incredible, deep and comprehensive information as well as inspiration for all of our participants. And as Sue mentioned, I did put a link to the Monitor Elementary story in your chat box, so feel free to copy and paste that into your browser after the webinar and take a look. We'll also send that in your follow-up email along with the ESSA brief that Sue mentioned. Springdale is a very, very interesting place, and I can definitely vouch that it's a great place to look for great stories and strategies. So Sue, I have one question I wanted to start with for you. You mentioned a bit about how students can help other students improve their attendance. Could you say a little bit more about that? One of the things that we have really been emphasizing over the past few years in Kentucky is opportunities for students to really take leadership and ownership of their education. And any examples or any specific strategies that you've seen for students within schools to help support better attendance amongst their classmates?
I'm going to share 2 examples. One of the most promising examples is an organization called Center for Supportive Schools, and they support schools and school districts in implementing a peer mentoring model where they work with juniors and seniors and train them to be peer mentors for incoming freshmen. And they have proven outcomes, academic, graduation, attendance, a whole variety of student engagement as a result of the peer mentoring model. But the students, the older students, get trained on facilitating small group conversations. They get trained on leadership skills. They help to facilitate partnerships with new incoming freshmen. And this goes back to our point earlier when we were talking about 9th grade being a really critical year in high school, and making sure that kids, when they show up in their new building, feel connected to someone in the building that they know and trust. And so a peer mentoring model can help to make that happen. And we just recently heard from a panel of kids who are part of that peer mentoring group. And what was really interesting to me is one of the things that the young people shared is that sometimes there's things going on in their lives that they want to talk about and don't always feel that they can talk to adults about the situation because it can raise it can result in other things happening that they don't want to set into motion. and maybe aren't ready to set into motion, but they have a peer mentor that they can talk to and help to get some advice before they start taking other actions. And even in those models, peer mentors are trained to say to their mentees, if there's something that they're hearing as an older youth that is potentially threatening to the child, then they do have to still report it. But it still creates a safe space, it creates a connection, and it's also someone who's been in 9th grade before, who has successfully made it out, and now they're a junior or a senior and they're successful. And so it really is such an important strategy. The other one I'll just share quickly is we've worked in Baltimore now with a group of kids they're from Wide Angle Youth Media, and they actually have partnered with us around developing youth messaging. And so they work with us to say, well, what messages are going to resonate with other kids like you about this issue of attendance? What should we be saying? Like, as adults, we know what we want to say, but that's not necessarily what kids are going to pick up on and place value on. And so they've been really incredible in helping us to think through messaging and then actually helping us to design posters and other materials that we've distributed to other youth.
Great. Those are wonderful examples, and we'll put those in our follow-up email as well. We had a comment come in from Christina Meredith. Thank you, Christina. She says that they do attendance challenges in their classroom for students to encourage their classmates to come to school every day, and that one school has a fishing trip at the end of the year as a reward. But again, that's really encouraging students to help other students.
That's exciting.
Yes, love it. Love these stories. And I would encourage all of you attending, as you have stories and examples to share, feel free to send them into us as well. And we would love to highlight them through our social media and other work that we do. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, Sue is making several appearances in Kentucky in the coming months and over the next year. And so I hope that you'll have a chance to interact with her and her colleagues in person through the work that you do every day. So with that, thank you so much again, Sue, and look forward to continuing to partner with you through various means in Kentucky. I am just going to share.
Thank you, Cory.
Yes.
I just want to thank you so much, Cory. Thank you, everyone who's on the call. I really appreciate your time, and late in the evening, it's clear dedication to the work, so thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, we love providing this forum, and we also are always interested in your all's feedback as participants about how we can improve these webinars to make them more useful to you. So with that, I would definitely encourage all of you to plan to join us for our next webinar. This will be the last one of the year. It will be in November, probably November the 10th. We are going to be partnering with Advanced CTE to discuss career readiness indicators and how they could play also, perhaps with chronic absenteeism, a very robust role within the state's accountability and public reporting system under ESSA into the future. This is an area where Kentucky has definitely innovated over the last few years, and really fabulous ways that we can build on our earlier success. You'll be able to see a recording of this webinar on our website at the web address mentioned there. Also, please sign up for updates from our blog, the Pritch blog, because we like to talk about our webinars on that blog, and you'll get notifications once they're posted. So thanks again to all for joining us, and best wishes for your holiday weekend, and best wishes for the rest of this semester of school and into the school year. Take care all.